Chapter 2, Section 1, Conditional Statements. What is a conditional statement? A conditional statement has two parts. It has a hypothesis and a conclusion. A conditional statement is written in if-then form. The if part is the hypothesis, and the then is the conclusion. Writing a conditional statement, it asks us to rewrite in if-then form. The statement that they give us is all mammals breathe oxygen. When you do not have one of the keywords if or then, you're going to keep the order of your hypothesis and conclusion the same as the original statement. So this says all mammals breathe oxygen. The first part that's going to become the hypothesis is that we're talking about mammals. And the then part, or what's going to become the conclusion, is that they breathe oxygen. So changing all mammals breathe oxygen to a conditional statement in if-then form, we can say if an animal is a mammal, then it breathes oxygen. Notice I had to change the wording a little bit. I had to add a few words in to say that we were talking about animals. Obviously, a mammal is an animal. So you're going to have to add in some words here and there. You're not going to be able to only use the words that they give you to rewrite it as a conditional statement. The next example asks us to rewrite in if-then form, all monkeys have tails. Notice I do not have an if or a then, so I need to keep the order the same. So I need to say that in the hypothesis that we're talking about monkeys, and in the conclusion I need to say that they have tails. So written in if-then form, I can say if an animal is a monkey, then it has a tail. Writing a counterexample again, we've already talked about counterexamples. Just a reminder that a counterexample shows that a conditional statement is false. Writing a counterexample says, write a counterexample if a number is odd, then it is divisible by 3. Before you can write a counterexample, you have to know what this statement says. Basically, this statement says that all odd numbers are divisible by 3. Can you think of an example that shows that this conditional statement is false? There are several counterexamples to this statement, if a number is odd, then it is divisible by 7. I came up with 7 is odd, and it is not divisible by 3. 1 is odd and is not divisible by 3. Now 3 is odd and it is divisible by 3. 5 would be another example. I think somebody gave the example of 37. So any odd number that you can think of that is not divisible by 3 would be a counterexample to this conditional statement. To find the converse of a conditional statement, it says the converse of a conditional statement is formed by switching the hypothesis and the conclusion. Your if and your then are going to stay in the same place, but you're going to switch what's the hypothesis and what's the conclusion. To find the inverse, it says the inverse of a conditional statement is formed when you negate the hypothesis and conclusion. So you have to negate both of that, or make that say the opposite of what it does. And a contrapositive, it says when you negate the hypothesis and conclusion of the converse of a conditional statement, you find the contrapositive. Basically, to find a contrapositive, you're going to switch the hypothesis and the conclusion and negate it. So you're going to find both the inverse and the converse at the same time to find the contrapositive. An example of this says write the inverse, converse, and contrapositive of the statement. If the amount of available food increases, then the deer population increases. The inverse, to find the inverse, we're going to say if the amount of available food does not increase, then the deer population does not increase. To find the converse, I'm going to go back to the original statement and I'm going to switch the hypothesis and the conclusion, which says if the deer population increases, then the amount of available food increases. And then to find the contrapositive, I can keep the converse and negate both the hypothesis and the conclusion. So the contrapositive would be if the deer population does not increase, then the amount of available food does not increase. The point, line, and plane postulates are on page 73 in your book. These are important postulates that you need to know. If you can pause this video and look at page 73, postulates 5 through 11. The next example also uses postulates 5 through 11. So if you have problems with these postulates and what they mean, then I would be more than happy to talk you through the next example also in person. Just see me before, after class, or in class if we have time. This is the example that I'm talking about. They ask you to give examples of postulates 5 through 11, which all deal with points, lines, and planes. An example using postulate 6, it asks us to write the inverse, converse, and contrapositive of postulate 6. Postulate 6 states that a line contains at least 2 points. To find the inverse, converse, and contrapositive, we have to first have a conditional statement. Remember, conditional statements are in if-then form. So before I can find the inverse, converse, and contrapositive, I have to rewrite this postulate as a conditional statement. So a line contains at least 2 points. As a conditional statement would say, if a figure is a line, then it contains at least 2 points. Notice I didn't have an if or a then in the original statement, so I kept the order the same and wrote it as an in if-then form. To find the inverse, I'm going to negate both the hypothesis and the conclusion, which would say if a figure is not a line, then it does not contain at least 2 points. To find the converse, I'm going to go back to the original and I'm going to switch the hypothesis and the conclusion. So the converse would be if a figure contains at least 2 points, then it is a line. And then the contrapositive would be if a figure does not contain at least 2 points, then it is not a line. Today's assignment is on page 75. It's numbers 10 through 42 even and 56. Please make sure that you look and read directions carefully. It will clarify some problems, get a little bit tricky and confusing if you do not read the directions and understand what they are asking you to do. So be careful.